Are We There Yet? The ultimate guide for travelers.
Traveling Beyond International Travel. Brought to you by CNIB. Ben Akwoko.
Exciting to be here today, and we have a really amazing topic and a really amazing guest as well. I could tell you guys could hear the smile on my face when I'm talking about this guest. We're going to be talking about international travel, and then we have our very own Elena to talk about that, who's part of the CNIB travel team. So, Elena, if you could say hi and tell a little bit more about yourself to the guests.
Hey, well, thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. My name is Elena Libakia. As Ben mentioned, I oversee CNIB's travel program. I've been with the CNIB for just over 2 years, but actually my journey with the CNIB started back in the 80s as a young child to a parent who lives with vision loss. So I remember growing up at the CNIB, visiting the library frequently with my father, picking up Braille. So the organization has been a place that's very close to home, and travel has been my career for the past 20 years. So for me, it's quite exciting, and I'm quite passionate about what I do. And the cause. So it's like both my worlds have combined. So I am so excited to speak with you all today. Travel should be on everyone's bucket list. And sometimes it's a matter of asking those questions, finding solutions, and working with ground operators, travel agencies, airports, your travel agents on preparing yourself for travel. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have travel related. So yeah, over to you, Ben.
Of course. Thank you so much, Elena. And just even speaking to you, and I remember even first meeting you, I was like, yeah, she definitely gets it. She definitely gets it, and even your passion as well. So that's definitely going to be illustrated within this conversation. So we're going to start it off with this question of when you're preparing for international travel, what should you be discussing with airlines?
Hey, so when you're looking at travel, booking yourself an international ticket, and if you require any sort of special assistance, this is something that needs to be communicated at the time of booking. When you're traveling, your agent or the online booking tool normally will ask if you require any special assistance. And by the information that you input, there's a designated code that's added to a traveler's profile. And based on that code, assistance is provided from the airport. It's important to mention that assistance or any special assistance is provided from the check-in counter to the curbside. So, when you have to make your own way to the check-in counter, and then from there through customs, through security, upon arrival at the destination, baggage claims, the airline is responsible to assist the traveler from the check-in counter to the curbside at destination. However, there's a lot of airports similar to Pearson that actually offer service from curbside to check-in. So it's just a matter of doing a research, asking your travel agent about the services available at each airport. So for example, at Pearson, there's a program or there's a number that you can call on the designated post where you arrive. There's a phone available there that can be pre-booked so that the airlines know and the airports know that you are arriving at a certain window frame. And then by arriving, you can call them and then they actually will come out and assist you to the check-in counter. So for those travelers that are traveling independently, there are at certain destinations and airports additional services available provided by the airport and not just the carrier. Also, before you book, you need to find out any entry visas or travel submissions that are required before you get there. For example, if you're traveling to Africa, quite often there's entry visas that are required to have that take time to process. So keeping that in mind. When you're traveling to certain Caribbean countries, airlines require submissions that just collect the passenger's information. And something to be aware of is not all destinations have accessible forms, but still require you to have this information available. For example, traveling to Cuba, you need to submit your information on their government site. The form itself may not be accessible. So it's knowing before you're booking. Really, that's the most important. What services are available, and what entry requirements are required, I guess, based on the passport that you're holding.
Yeah, and those are such great points, and that's really good to know because I know with travel, sometimes we're so distracted in getting our own materials from our own side and forget about when you get to that other country. So that's really, really good to know. Yes. So when making arrangement for international flights and hotels, what details should we include with our reservation?
So, as I previously mentioned, regarding flights, it's a matter of letting them know at time of booking that you do require that special assistance. And at that time, if it's through a travel agent, they can just add the code to your booking. Sometimes if you need additional service support, if you're traveling with a wheelchair or an electronic wheelchair, there's some more information that's required from the airline that would require you to communicate directly with their medical desks. For example, if you're traveling with a guide dog, contacting Air Canada's medical desk and what additional information they may need before you book travel to go out international. It's important to make a note with the hotel that you're visiting about rooms. So in my experience working with hotels, a lot of our travelers don't necessarily require an accessible room. They just require a well-located room. So it makes it easier to request a room that's by the elevator. It makes it easier if you're traveling with a guide dog to have a ground level room. These are things that can be requested directly with the hotel prior to your arrival. Especially when you're traveling internationally and there may not be the codes that were or the bylaws that are in place in Canada across the country. For example, I was traveling actually to the States just a few weeks ago, and although the hotel rooms had braille on the doors, the elevator itself wasn't accessible. This is something that you should know. So if the hotel is aware of your arrival, and if it's a hotel like the one that I visited where there was the elevators were not accessible, then it's good knowing prior to your arrival, because it could either change your decision to visit that property or request a room that doesn't require you to get on an elevator to reach. And again, making sure that your file is definitely coded for flights, because if that code is not on your traveler's profile, then the airlines don't communicate amongst each other to provide the required service.
And that's a very good point. And it's once again that research for sure that
Yeah, definitely.
It's so important. And I like the point that you made mention of when looking at a room location, because we've been having a lot of discussion about having when we look at rooms that are accessible, and then here you have individuals who work at the hotel and they're like, we're going to give you an accessible room. You don't have to step over the shower, and accessibility that you may not necessarily need coming from a sight loss perspective. So
Definitely.
very good point. Very good.
And so Ben, just to echo that, accessibility, to be considered accessible, I find that in my experience, when speaking with suppliers and when they say that they are accessible, they're referring to wheelchair accessibility. But accessibility, there's multiple layers in different angles on what it is to be accessible. So I think we're often overshadowed by um, those that are traveling in with a wheelchair, because that's like the international stamp and a recognition of what it is to be accessible. So it's really about educating the hotel. So I'm often having conversations with them saying we don't need a wheelchair accessible room. We require a room that's, again, well located. There are some hotels that have dark corridors that don't often work with those that are partially sighted. These are things that we review before we book. And it's a matter of asking, and asking for, if we request with the hotel any assistance. So if somebody's traveling by themselves and require assistance navigating through the property, this is something that we actually request at the time of booking. So there's usually somebody at the hotel front desk that is waiting for, is aware, and is happy to assist somebody, and just provide even a walkthrough of the property, whether it be visiting the gym, whether if you're there for business and visiting, meeting spaces, boardrooms. Hotels our staff are, I can say, pretty much always happy to provide navigational support whenever requested. And really, this is a learning curve for them as well. The honest truth is that in my experience, many just don't know. And post-COVID, unfortunately, there was a lot of job loss and a lot of new staff that have come in. So those experienced that were experienced in the industry, a lot of them lost their jobs during the pandemic. So right now there's a shift. There's a lot of newcomers that just don't have the experience and just don't know. So it's really important that we're vocal and let them know what are the needs.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head about being vocal and assertive, because actually a quick story, and move on to the next question, and we could have a Q&A as well, where I frequently visit a hotel in London, which the elevators had no type of indication. I think I made mention to you of
Yep.
this, Elena, and no indication, just flat, uh, no numbers at all, no speaking of the elevator. And I remember speaking to one of the staff. She's like, "This is ludicrous. This is like," and I told the hotel, I let Elena know it was for work. And I remember actually just today, I'm in London, and I went to that hotel, and a lady ran up to me and she's like, "We're getting our elevators, and we have one elevator done," and she was so excited, right? And she's like,
Yeah,
"I'm so glad that you made mention." Yeah.
exactly. And I actually remember that, Ben. I remember that case, and I know that they did let us know that they were working on it. And that's really part of it. It's being vocal and letting them know what they need to be, how they need to become accessible, because again, it's a journey. So I mean, we can't have the expectations that, I mean, when we're traveling, regardless of the type of traveler, there's always deviations. There's going to be a missed flight. There's going to be lost baggage. It's really about preparing yourself, and not being surprised by the barriers that we face. Sometimes we almost expect them. So how do we prepare ourselves from them? Well, speaking to the hotel, knowing before we get there that elevator is not accessible, that will help us choose a different property. So at least when it comes to domestic Canada, we know that there are rules. They need to be compliant. So there's more of an assurance there. But in terms of international, it's really hard to follow what all bylaws require, right? So, for example, in the UK, they're a very accessible country in terms of roads, in terms of for example, London as a city. It's quite accessible to get around. A lot of even their site attractions are becoming more accessible, providing audio voices, providing touch experiences. So it's more of an immersive experience. So they're becoming more aware and they're growing. However, their hotels don't require them, their bylaws don't require them to have Braille on their doors or in elevators. It's not actually a mandated requirement yet. So when we're booking and when we're searching for properties, we know this. So we can't expect that because this is what we know in Canada. But what can we do to still have that travel experience, to still enjoy London, enjoy the hotel amenities? It's more so about being prepared, letting the hotel know that you're arriving, and with that, they can work with you or your travel agent in ensuring that a suitable room is provided, and the appropriate assistance is set up. Sometimes it's a matter of the hotel just providing a menu in Braille. It's not costly, or providing electronic menus. So it's ways to help create a more accessible experience, right? So having that expectation, again, like I said, regardless of the type of traveler, we have to be prepared. So when it comes to accessibility, especially internationally, it's really about asking the questions and learning about the destination that you're traveling to.
Oh, well said, well said. So I'm going to go into this next question, and we'll take some questions and answers from the audience. So what amenities are a priority for hotels for those who live with sight loss, whether using a guide dog, cane, or just overall?
I touched a bit on it on the previous question, but ensuring hotels offer Braille in rooms, room doors, or on elevators where possible. If not, what is making sure an evacuation plan is available in case of an emergency. So knowing, if they're not going to provide Braille on the doors, when you're being guided to your room, ensuring that the staff member shows you where the exit doors are. It's nice for hotel restaurants to offer large print menus or magnifiers, or ask for an electronic menu that can be used with a screen reader. That's accessible with a screen reader. If you're traveling with a guide dog, it's important to have a safe relief area that's close to the hotel. And that's one issue that we're often experiencing, is that, especially in downtown corridors, having safe relief spaces for guide dogs is not always easily accessible. So we try to work with properties that have some grass area, that have a safe distance or short distance to a park. That comes in really handy. And also some like minor things like having a garbage can near an exit door when you're traveling with a guide dog comes in handy, right? So not many hotels have garbage cans by the exit doors. So, you can imagine as a guide dog handler, that can be an issue, traveling back up to your room with your guide dog after they've gone to the park or they've used the facilities right on the property. So there are minor things that we found that would change the experience. So something as simple as having the magnifiers, having the menus, or providing electronic samples of the menus, where we can send to our travelers before they arrive, and they can have that information available, and not rely on somebody to describe for them. And just again, Braille wherever possible, large print is always appreciated. And then, just the lighting, the contrast, that's something that is, I think, important as well. And in my experience, at least with the properties that I've been reviewing in Ontario, as hotels go renovations, they are more mindful of that. And it's honestly the staff as well is a big piece to this, right? So I can give you an example. We had some of our board stay at a Toronto property, and there was a breakfast that was included, and the servers just didn't know how to properly assist, right? So they were taking the order of a blind client and board member. And, when they were taken the order, they didn't present themselves so that the client knew that they were speaking to them. So it was something as had they known as maybe like a tap on the shoulder, so that they could make themselves presentable, or so that the client knew that the guest, or sorry, the waiter was speaking to them, that it was their turn. Then it was, when they brought their meal to them, the server was trying to butter their toast. So, I mean, the intention was, she had a good intention, but, that wasn't something that was needed, right? There was an assumption that was made. So it's a matter of just training your staff. And you trust me, there was some training that happened after that incident. But, if we're not vocal, then they don't know. So I think training is really important. Having servers or staff understand that, we don't need a wheelchair to be taken to our rooms or to be transferred in an airport, or whatever the case may be, unless there's a specific need. So, but it's really about training and educating. And I can assure you that server now understands that although they meant well, it wasn't the appropriate action to assist a guest who was blind, right? So.
Very true, very true. And it's a perfect example of when you do look at advocacy, and we like to touch upon it, assertiveness versus aggression, right? And the way that you educate, and the way that you self-advocate for yourself. So very, very great points, Elena. We talked about guide dogs a little bit, but with our guide dogs, if you could go into more details of what guide dog users should be aware of when traveling international.
So it's really the entry level requirements to start. They vary from country to country. In addition to letting your airline know that you're traveling with a service animal, what you also need to do is register often with the destination. So, for example, if you're traveling to London, to the UK, in addition to making the arrangements with the airline, you have to register with London Heathrow Airport, and they create a file for you, so that when you arrive at the airport, you then go to the office, and they will be, prior to travel, they'll give you all the information that the requirements. So, there's things like certifications, some guide dog passports, vaccination requirements. And when they require, if there's any vaccines that require, there's often like specific dates of that they need to be administered prior to travel. So they will let you know of all that information. But again, this should be done before you travel. So in also when it comes to traveling abroad, to be completely honest, we've experienced some disappointing situations where, the airlines issue these blanket statements where they treat service animals as emotional support animals. And unfortunately, there's still some confusion as to the role and purpose of service animals. So what's happened is, there's some airlines that require a passenger traveling with guide dogs to authorize them to basically remove the animal, be responsible, liable for any damage, if the dog misbehaves per se, they have the right to euthanize the animal. This is going really extreme, but I'll be honest with you, we've actually seen it on a Canadian carrier's website. So it's knowing what their terms are, what the rights are, and then making that decision of whether traveling with a service animal or not.
Yeah, and that's a very sad, and I know it's an extreme situation. That's a very sad situation for sure.
It really is. So it's something that we're fighting. It's something that even, for domestic travel, we're really trying to advocate and spread awareness. There's still lots of room to grow. but on an international level, even more so. That there's still this stigma on the purpose of the service animal is not a pet. So it's, again, it goes back to training, it goes back to educating, advocacy work. So we're still ways away, but first step is always, check the requirements with the airline, check with the requirements with the airport that you're traveling to, and ensure that you have the vet visits lined up with what those requirements are.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, I bet a lot of the audience members are wondering, what was that line of dog being disruptive enough to be euthanized? Was it?
It was basically you had to agree to the terms of the airline in order for them to approve the animal in cabin.
Okay.
So if you didn't approve, if you didn't authorize, then before confirming, and sometimes it was just a verbal confirmation that when you call the airline to add the animal to your booking, they have these pre-recorded messages, and you have to say I agree to it. But sometimes, like the travel is safe for like domestic, but they're still using these blanket statements. So it's again, it goes back to educating. It's a work in progress, but you really just need to know before traveling, what the requirements are.
Of course, and that's very, very good to know for those who are guide dog users. You prompted a really good aspect and to be informed about situations such as that, for sure. So I have here the next question. We're going to go into using money and currency. So when it comes to currency, a lot of different countries don't have that accessible currency that we have here in Canada with the braille cells. So do you have any ideas or any techniques on how to track your currency when you're in a different country?
It's really case by case. It varies country to country. I'll give an example. We were traveling to Peru this past spring, and it was easier to exchange money off a street vendor than it was to the bank, but it's not safe. So if you're traveling with an attendant or part of a group, then and when you're traveling to more so, I guess, third world countries where maybe the corruption scale is higher, this is where we need to be really mindful of the possibility of being scammed. My recommendation is always, at least what I always do, is I try to bring some currency with me. And I often, where Canadian dollars are not accessible or don't have a good exchange rate, I usually travel with US dollars, bring some US dollars, because that's usually more globally accepted, and there's better value for that. But try to bring some of the local currency with you. Use cards where available, because you can also always trace it back. I mean, if there's an issue with fraud or anything, you can report it. You have assistance there. And really try to exchange money if you're staying at a hotel. There's usually currency booths within the properties or through a local bank.
Great techniques. And I even find just recently traveling outside the country, and even a question for myself that I'm curious about, are you able to access different currencies from the bank besides American money? Because I know taking American money is easy to go to your local bank and switch it over.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, for example, you don't want to, for example, going to Cuba, right? Don't exchange too much at once, because then you can't bring it back with you, right? So being conscious of that. So, if you can exchange in small increments, especially where currencies are not readily available in Canada, I would recommend you do that. So exchange for what you need, but not don't maybe budget what your actual spend will be when you're making that exchange. And if need be, you can exchange some more. But if you exchange more than what you need, and then you are basically stuck with that currency when you come back, because you won't be able to exchange it back to Canadian upon your return.
Okay, very great tip. Very, very great tip for anybody traveling internationally. And then I know another thing with I guess American money is the only one I really did it with it. And then when I went to Ghana as well, is folding in a different way. So taking it old school, right? Before you go on the trip, you
Well,
have floating currency. Sorry, Helena?
yeah, no, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I remember my dad before I mean, when my background is Greek, so when he would travel to Greece, and even back in the day when it was still drachmas, there was no braille on the currency. So before he would leave, he would take his he would ask us what the value was, and then he would just put braille on it so that he knew what he had in his pocket. So
Mm,
sometimes you're right, you do just have to go back to old school ways, and
mm,
it may be easier, especially in destinations that don't um don't have card services readily available. But the truth is that I think more and more we're moving to like electronic. So visas are quite widely accessible, and actually preferred as well. I was really surprised when I traveled to Cuba that, I didn't even need to exchange any money because I could pay for everything using my card, whether it would be like a $5 hop on, hop off. I could use it use my card for it. So it's again doing some research before you go, finding out, if the currency is available at Canadian banks. If it is, then have some ready. And then if it's not, when you're local, at least to start, especially if you're traveling by yourself, only exchange from trusted resources. So whether it be in the hotel or at a bank, where it's safe.
wonderful, great tips. And I'm going to move on to the next question. So, essential items that we should be carrying on to international trips, what are they?
Okay. Well, first, any medications, please do not pack them in your luggage. Medications need to be with you in your carry-on. It's not worth the risk, because especially if you're connecting, even if you're not connecting, there's baggage delays happen often, and you should be prepared. Be prepared for that. Change of clothes. I always pack like just one change of clothes in case my luggage get lost. That I have something to change into if need be, especially if I'm traveling to a destination that has a different climate. I suggest your carry-on. So traveling now with carry-on, airlines charge for check-in baggage. So what a lot of people are doing is traveling with carry-on size hard shell luggage. And that's really convenient because you avoid the fees. In most cases, they fit in the overhead compartment. The problem is that everybody's caught on to that. So especially for traveling trans-border where aircrafts are smaller or even domestic, quite often what's happening is airlines are forcing passengers to check in their carry-on sized hard shell luggage because there's just not room for everybody to bring the carry-on in cabin or to fit it in the overhead compartment. So and then you fall into the same problem. So if if you're forced to check it in, then what if you lose your belongings? It becomes a headache. So what I suggest is backpacks. If you're going to have a carry-on, especially for your medication or anything of value that you travel with, backpacks are safe because they'll fit in the legroom in front of you, and you won't be forced to check in a backpack. So where possible, if I could make a recommendation, and I just experienced it a few weeks ago, and actually just traveling to San Francisco, and they were larger aircrafts. Whoever hadn't paid, whoever had a carry-on that wasn't part of like the elite or premium economy or paid for extra legroom, was basically, they told the travelers, once we get to zone 3, we're not going to have enough room for your luggage, so you're going to have to check it in. So I mean, it's not pleasant for anyone, but just be prepared, and if you can travel with something light and small that can fit underneath the luggage, the foot space in front of you, it's a recommendation.
Very good tip. Very good tip. And I like how you highlighted upon keeping your most important things in your carry-on because to share a personal experience just happened lately where there was one point where they did lose my luggage and they finally found it after 2 hours. But yeah, I was lucky that I didn't have anything really, really important and I was willing to have it shipped to me, but it does happen. It's not a rarity. So
And well, I'll be honest, like my father has been robbed in an aircraft.
mhm.
There is, there's always that risk, but it's knowing where if your luggage or your carry-on is near you, the risk is much lower. So, and if an attendant is taking your carry-on and stowing it overhead, making sure that they show you, where exactly your luggage is, so you have access to it at any given time. What happens, actually maybe I shouldn't say often, but it happens from time to time that because a flight is so heavily sold that the carry-on, the overhead space above you is full by the time you make your way to the aircraft, that they have to move your luggage a distance from you. So and in cases like that, you need to know where your luggage is. So making sure that if you seek assistance, if an attendant is helping you, that you be vocal and let them know that you want to know where your luggage is at all times.
And that's a really good point. And I feel like the self-advocacy muscle as well, like at least for myself, if someone does take luggage of mine and stows it away above me, like first of all, for myself, I would just let them or ask them if I could do it on my own. Or if they're gonna do it, take my hand, at least let me touch where it's gonna be. Because I feel like that's great self-assurance that
Yeah.
you know where
Tra-
it is, right?
Travel with a fanny pack. Fanny
Yeah.
packs are great. Maybe
Mhm.
not, I think they've
Not the
actually made a
stylist.
fashionable return as well.
Yeah.
But fanny packs are great because you should have everything, like any documents, anything available, it should be on you. Keep it on you. It's safest.
Mhm.
You know, yeah, it's having your passport. Like when you go through security, you have to put your stuff away in the screeners. So I always hold my passport in my hand, and then they may have to check it to make sure that I'm not trying to hide anything in my passport, but I don't let go of my passport. I always keep it on me. Just to ensure that, it doesn't get lost. It doesn't get stolen.
I actually adopted that technique from you when on my
Yeah.
last trip just a few weeks ago. I was like, they're like, put down your passport. I was like, nope, let me hold it. I'm not going through without it. So that's a very, very good technique for sure.
Mhm.
And just always letting yourself know where your items are. It's so key. It's very, very key. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back into questions. So I answer through these questions and the rest of the um session we could do some questions.
Sure.
And this is perfect timing for this question and how we were just speaking about the situation that we just had talked about and the attitudes of individuals in a different country when it does come to site laws. How would you address that?
Good question. Honestly, I have no expectations. If it's um airport staff, airline staff, hotel staff, there's still industry in the travel industry in general, from across the board, they require a lot of training on how to properly assist somebody who's blind or partially sighted. There's just a general misunderstanding of what the needs are of a blind or partially sighted traveler. You can expect more often than not when you arrive at the airport to be offered a wheelchair. You can politely refuse. It's quite often it's not because they're being because they're discriminating. It's just because they don't know better. Take it as an opportunity to educate. Be vocal. Let them know what you need and what you don't need. When you're offered that accessible room, decline. Right? If you're at a hotel and the server or at a restaurant and a server tries to butter your toast, or I've also witnessed servers grab a guest's hand to show them where their cup is or where their fork and knife is. Let them know, like, no, thank you. I find that there's a very fine line between having empathy and having pity, and it's about educating and letting them know, because if we don't do our job and letting them know, then they just don't. You don't know what you don't know. So don't expect to experience barriers, but what you can do is prepare yourself for those barriers. So having as much information as you can before you travel, becoming familiar with the hotel before you arrive, making sure that if you're traveling with the airline, that they know that you're traveling. If there's additional service available at the airport, take advantage of it. In terms of traveling with a guide dog, know your rights, right? You need to know, let them know, so you can show up at the airport. If you're traveling within Canada, your service animal, depending on their size and breed, they're allowed in cabin. They're allowed that extra seat free of charge. Know what you're entitled to, and speak up when you are told otherwise, right? So I guess in a nutshell, not having expectations, I think that will perhaps help in maybe being pleasantly surprised, and you may enlighten somebody else through your travel experience, and they'll know for the next traveler, when they meet a blind or partially sighted traveler, not to not to approach them with a wheelchair, to offer their elbow, just to ask. If you're traveling with a guide dog, let them know, it's a guide dog. The animal is not to be pet. It's about setting those boundaries, letting them know. So it's an experience, it's a journey, and I still think, despite the barriers that we consider to face, and the barriers that we continue to face and continue to advocate for, travel is still, I wouldn't change. I would still encourage all to travel, to experience different countries, to experience the cultures. There's still so much more that we can gain from. So yeah, I guess if that answers the question, I guess it comes down to being prepared, being open-minded, and becoming an advocate and educating those that are providing assistance.
I'm definitely flexing that advocacy muscle for sure. And even with that said, like the patience and sometimes that thick-skinned mentality as well, because in different countries, in different regions, maybe how they look at disability is so different from the way we look at disability, right? So I like how you made mention it's a good opportunity to educate and let people know, like, certain ways in how you can be helped, right?
Yeah, sometimes you just got to get loud. We have to get loud to be heard, right? And especially when in terms of accessibility, there are so many different angles and different layers of accessibility. And as a supplier or a vendor, sometimes we are overshadowed by the big guys, right? So that whose needs is more prominent. So we're kind of put on the back burner. So we have to do our part in voicing it. Now, I'll provide an example. We had Park and Fly. Park and Fly, not sure if many of you with your families use it if traveling, but we had one of our staff clients that were traveling with their family using, out of Montreal airport, traveling with their family and their service animal, with their guide dog, and the driver refused to accept the guide dog on the shuttle from the parking lot to the airport. And it required a lot of back and forth. There was, the traveler refused to leave until he was accepted on with his family and his guide dog. It delayed the coach, but a manager was called and they referred to the laws, and he ended up getting on that coach, and there was a complaint that was submitted. There was also like the follow-up, but now that driver knows. Now they know, they can't pull that again, right? So, in the moment, it's frustrating, it's upsetting, it's time consuming, but eventually, it's unfortunately something that you have to encounter to move past it and to become to provide more of a learning path for somebody else.
Very great points. Very great points. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question. So, what website should we utilize, or who should we connect when we are preparing to go on a trip and looking at the necessary documentation as well?
Travel.gc.ca. That would be if there's anyone that I recommend, if there's any website I suggest, is that would be the website. That should be your first point when booking travel. There you'll find information on if there's an advisory in effect, if there's visa requirements, any information travel related, like if there is an advisory against travel, you're not going. What entry requirements are required based on the passport that you're holding. So just if that's always my first go-to. That should be your first go-to as well. Check travel.gc.ca.
Wonderful. And is there any others? I know that's top one for sure.
You know what? Honestly, I that's usually my, because the government of Canada is really who their guidance, who we should follow. So and the airlines will follow, and the insurance companies, they all follow the guidelines of what the government offers. So if there's, for example, a travel advisory against travel to a certain destination, and you decide to travel, and something happens, you have to go home. Well, that insurance company that you have to cover you to come home is not going to cover you because there's a travel advisory in effect. So that's something that's always the first go-to. So it's connected amongst it's basically it connects the destination with the suppliers. So if there is an advisory, if something's happening at the destination, the government declares an emergency or an advisory against travel, then that has a trickle-down effect. So airlines, that's when they'll cancel. That's when they'll or providers offer reimbursement. So it's really important to check there first, because that will be that negates what the other tourism partners, airlines, vendors, suppliers, what's processes and reimbursements they offer travelers. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. All right, perfect. So those are basically the questions that we have. Before we stop the recording, Lena, is there any last comments or any takeaways that you want to leave behind?
Well, first, just thank you for having me here. With booking travel, being with the CNIB, combining my passion for travel and for the cause, I've really grown, and I feel like there's a lot room for growth in the industry, and we're just starting to scratch the surface. So we just have to be consistent and persistent and continue to carry that voice so we can make change. So, but in my experience, just with my personal experience with my father, we are more advanced. So the use of technology is just so great when you're traveling. My father will travel by himself to Athens, Greece, and even as a sighted traveler, you can get lost. But now with having access to technology like IRA, it helps him. He doesn't have to rely on strangers to help him out. So there's these accommodations now in place that weren't available even 5-10 years ago. And I think that's the path that we're going. So with time, with patience, perseverance, I think we're headed to a much more, like, there's going to be more accessibility. There's more laws in place. We're becoming more vocal with the industry. And I think that's going to result in change.
Well said, well said. And also, thank you so much for your different perspectives on travel, coming from the personal side of it, witnessing your father, as well as the CNIB and the work that you do. And we're very excited to see what you come up with. So once again, thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me here.